Buddies by Delaina M. Waldron, narrated by Darren Oliver. There was a beautiful garden behind a big old house. This wasn't just any garden. The garden was divided into two. One side had all types of beautiful flowers in bloom, and on the other side there was only dirt. Nothing grew until a young, beautiful red rose covered with thorns had just budded out of the ground. Her name was Rosaline. Everything was new to her. She smiled and looked as happy as can be as she stared in awe at the bright blue sky and enjoyed the warmth from the radiant, glowing sun. She even waved excitedly at the birds as they flew by. But something else was new to her. A group of flowers on the other side of the garden that were not so kind to Rosaline. The flowery group was made up of an orange tulip, a violet flower, a white orchid, and a very tall and slim, beautiful sunflower. Every day since Rosaline budded out of the ground, the flowery group had made fun of Rosaline. Rosaline was the only rose in the gardens, and she looked different from the other flowers. She had tried to talk to the other flowers, but they ignored her and made fun of her thorns that covered her long stem. It had made Rosaline very sad and lonely. Each day that went by, Rosaline was sadder. She didn't look up at the bright blue sky any more. She didn't enjoy the warm rays from the sun, and she didn't wave at the birds as they flew by. Rosaline had also become weak. She was losing her vibrant red colour. Her petals were slowly falling off, and her thorny stem grew limp. She was not what she once was when she first budded out of the ground. Rosaline had given up. Until one day a loud buzzing sound was heard. The bumblebees appeared, and all of the flowers were excited and putting on their glittery pollen makeup as Rosaline stared at them confused. Each bumblebee looked serious as they carried their buckets, one in each hind leg. They went up to the flowers and took the glittery pollen and put it into their buckets. Rosaline curiously stared at them as the flowers excitedly waited to be picked by the bumblebees. Rosaline tried to fix her limp and faded petals, but the flowers laughed at poor Rosaline, as none of the bumblebees picked her. Rosaline was very disappointed. Suddenly, an odd buzzing sound could be heard in the distance. A lone bumblebee struggling to catch up had finally arrived. The unique bumblebee had a short left wing, unlike the normal bumblebees that had two full wings. The other bumblebees were so busy they did not notice him and prevented him from collecting the shiny pollen from the flowers. The bumblebee was exhausted and rested on the closest thing he could find. He looked disappointed as he rubbed his short wing, and soon realized he was resting on Rosaline. Rosaline was shy and quickly looked away from the bumblebee. Bobby said, "Hey, hi." Rosaline looked bashful as she asked, "What are your friends doing?" Bobby smiled proudly and said, "We're collecting pollen." "Pollen? What's pollen?" "It's our food. Some flowers make pollen and we collect them to eat." Rosaline looked confused and asked, "Do I have pollen?" He carefully inspected her and ruffled up her petals, but they drooped down and were dull in colour. Bobby looked disappointed and sadly said, "No, Rosaline looked down sad. The other flowers started laughing at them, and Bobby stared at the flowers, annoyed. Rosaline started to cry, and Bobby asked, "Oh, why are you crying?" She sadly said, "They don't like me." She looked away, trying to hide her tears. Bobby thought to himself and said, "Wait, I know what will cheer you up." He quickly flew above her, and because of his short wing, he did backflips. He flew around in circles as Rosaline tried not to laugh. And Bobby continued with one more flying trick. He flew as if he was swimming on his back, and Rosaline finally laughed. He flew over to her and said, "My name is Bobby. What is your name?" "My name is Rosaline." "Nice to meet you, Rosaline." The other flowers started to laugh and pointed at Rosaline and Bobby. Rosaline sadly looked down, almost in tears. Bobby looked annoyed and asked the flowers, "Hey, what are you laughing at?" Sunflower laughed and said, "Don't they make a cute couple? An odd couple?" The flowers laughed loudly. Bobby said, "Oh, yeah." Bobby whistled as loud as he could, and suddenly all of the bumblebees collecting pollen stopped and stared at him. Bobby waved at the other bumblebees and yelled out, "Let's go, guys! We're not wanted here." The flowery group looked shocked as all of the bumblebees grabbed their buckets and started to leave. "Wait, where are you going?" asked Sunflower. Rosaline looked down sad, and Bobby said, "Don't let them get to you, kid. They don't like you because you're different, but sometimes different is good." He pointed to himself and continued, "Look at me. I'm different from the other bees, but just because I have a short wing doesn't mean I can't fly. You might be the only red rose in the garden, but you're just as beautiful as they are, and way more beautiful on the inside." Rosaline sadly nodded, and he continued, "Get better, kid." Bobby flew away, and Rosaline waved goodbye. Sunflower yelled out, "You made them leave!" Rosaline ignored Sunflower. She looked up and admired the blue sky. She enjoyed the warm rays from the sun, and she waved at the birds as they flew by. Suddenly, it started raining. Rosaline closed her eyes and enjoyed the raindrops falling on her petals. The rain stopped, and she looked down at a puddle of water. She stared at her reflection and smiled. Rosaline had become the beautiful, long-stemmed red rose she was destined to become, and accepted herself as different, until the flowery group giggled and laughed at Rosaline. But they suddenly stopped. Rosaline curiously looked behind her, and was shocked to see that her side of the garden was full of roses that looked just like her. They had budded from the ground. The flowery group laughed and pointed at them, but they quickly stopped laughing and looked nervous. Rosaline and all of the roses stared back at the flowery group, annoyed. Rosaline then proudly looked around at her new friends and giggled. The end.